All right. Thank you for staying with the Monday Report. It's time now for that discussion on the town hall session. You can send in your questions at Trevor Mbija at Citizen TV Kenya. Use the hashtag Monday Report. We're speaking to Annie Reri. She's the ELOG chair and also the FIDA executive director. ELOG is the Elections Observers Group. And Lilian Mahiri Zaja is joining us online. She's the former vice chair for IEBC. Thank you all for making time. And Anna, I'll start with you. As ELOG, it's a year to the elections. Are you happy with the level of preparedness?
Thank you, Trevor, for having me. On behalf of ELOG, which is the largest citizen observer group, a lot still needs to be done. There has been considerable steps made. However, there are crucial issues that still need to be addressed. And as ELOG, we have been in the forefront, not just today, not a few months ago, but we have been consistent since the last election in 2017 about crucial reforms that ought to have been made by now.
Yeah, what are those crucial reforms that you say have to be done?
I think we're looking at a lot of legislative reforms that have been proposed. There are a lot of administrative as well as policy reforms that are required. Top of the list, I think we're looking at how we are going to ensure that registration takes place. We are looking at election campaign financing. There has been a start today, but that is not the end. And there is still a lot, even in terms of the constitution of the IEBC or the election management body as is, from the commissioners to ensure the Secretariat is able to perform its functions fully. So we still have a raft of measures that have been presented to Houses of Parliament and the National Assembly and Senate together. And in terms of ensuring that this needs to be done, we have given timelines. Looking back at where we've come from, Trevor, we are looking at a third cycle post-Kriegler's report that was very clear in terms of election management in the country, what needs to happen. So 12 months towards the election, a lot still needs to be done, but we're not going to lose hope. I think if we get serious as a country, resource the required institutions, then we'll be able to say we are ready for the elections. Madam Zaja, you've been there before, Madam Zaja, as the former vice chair for IEBC. They presented a budget of 40.9 billion shillings. Is this practical from where you stand?
Thank you, Trevor, for having me this evening. Today we've had the chairperson of IEBC speak to the budget. And yes, they have presented the figures that their budget is 40.9 billion. But what they have received from the National Treasury is about 26 billion, thereby leaving a deficit of 14 billion. Really, it's going to be a tall order, carrying out the activities as planned in the EOP and as rolled out under the strategic plan they have for 2020 to 2024. It's quite difficult, and you had the chairman earlier alluding to this fact that even when it comes to activities such as the mass voter registration, which they have planned for a 30-day, for the first phase, they will have to cut that down to 15 days. So a lot of these things are dependent on both the administrative and the statutory timelines that are set. So cutting them down, for instance, we cannot cut down the number of cost drivers, such as a cap on the 700 voters per polling station. That is a statutory requirement. So it is really going to be an uphill task, looking at some of the challenges. And of course, with the introduction of the corona pandemic budget in elections, it's really going to be tough working for the Commission to work under those budgetary constraints.
From your own experience, why are our elections so expensive?
They're very expensive because, remember, we are looking at issues, people issues, especially our relations as a society, trust issues. We have a society that does not trust its own people, its own institutions. So an announcement that came from the Commission that now our ballot paper is more secure than before with 8 security features, that is supposed to make people more satisfied that, yes, we're going to see an election that is credible. But that should not be the case. We have big countries, big jurisdictions such as India, which are now over 1 billion voters, I believe. But they carry out the most simple election because they trust the people they put in office. So it's a question of how we relate with one another, how political parties and how politics are organized in our country. And I think we might hit rock bottom where we might want to rethink what Article 10 of the Constitution really means, why we cannot be patriotic and really live to those key principles of governance.
Yeah. And what do you make of the budget that IEBC has presented, considering there's a deficit of about 14 billion?
I think I did listen to what the chairperson said, and what we need to remember is that these particular elections in 2022 will be compounded by the COVID-19 pandemic, which means higher costs and ensuring that the restrictions and the guidelines are followed in terms of the protocol. And I think he has been consistent in terms of stating what is needed and the deficit that he's facing. Yeah. What we need to now ensure is that as citizens, we need to have the Exchequer and Treasury understand why we are getting to the 40 billion mark and what it means to have a deficit. And just as her former commissioner has said, in our country, Trevor, the challenge we are having is the issue of trust. And that's why we have been keen, even as ILOC, to ensure that citizens understand that elections is not the 9th of August 2022. It is a process. There is a pre-election period. Citizens need to be engaged. When we talk about voter education, civic education, we need to have citizens standing up. And then, of course, on the D-Day, have them vote peacefully, go home, and thereafter. So when we have more citizen engagement from the bottom and in terms of us understanding, then we'll even be able to relate to figures that the IEBC gives. If they state they need 40 billion, then as citizens, we are also aware. But from where we sit as ILOC, we do understand how the 40 billion is was arrived at. And for us, it's a disappointment that up to now, the IEBC is still seeking money that is yet to be given to them. So I think we have been consistent as well in indicating that we need to get serious, bearing in mind that the trust issues and the resourcing issues of elections in this country are top of the list of ensuring we have free, fair, and credible elections.
Yeah. But at the same time, when I was speaking to the chairman earlier on, and he said there are still places that don't have network coverage.
Yes.
So they still have challenges with that.
Absolutely. And how, if you look at it in terms of figures, as you've had, in terms of our law, there are requirements that have to be followed up. So the IEBC is not declaring, for example, we need 700 voters for the sake of it. It is law. And as a result of that particular provision, we have over 40,000 polling stations in this country, which means each of those polling centers must have adequate electricity or an alternative. Yeah. We need to have network coverage, bearing in mind the same legislation, same law has really empowered the part of a polling center in terms of declaration and transmission of results. Yeah. So we need to then put our money where our mouth is. If that is the law that has been created, the jurisprudence that really empowers a form that we refer to as Form 34A that is generated from a polling center, then we need to be able to put all mechanisms that are required so that citizens feel from the polling center the transmission is free, fair, and credible. That way, at the national level, then we will have less and less of complaints. Yes, we might not have a perfect election. I don't think there's any jurisdiction in the world that has. But what you do is to try and minimize complaints and have clear dispute mechanisms where disputes do arise. Yeah.
Madam Zaja, I speak to your experience because you've been there before. So if IEBC doesn't get this budget, then what does that mean? Does it then compromise the election, or do they have a way of cutting down?
Already the chairperson spoke to that. He said, for instance, the mass voter registration, which was to be rolled out for 30 days, they will have to do that probably within those budget constraints of having 15 days for the first phase and probably another 15, which is next year, and next month, the first phase. Well, just again to talk about the issue of network coverage. Remember, technology has been a challenge to the Commission. It has been highlighted as a key priority area. And remember that from lessons learned in 2017, it was clear that there are areas where the elections or returning officers had to leave a polling station. And remember, the polling station is the primary source of the results. But a presiding officer has to leave a polling station because there is no 3G coverage, and they have to go to a place where there is network coverage. Those are the kind of challenges the IEBC officers have to contend with. We don't get to hear, those of us who worked in the commission, you don't get to hear what some of our officers in IEBC go through, the ones who have to serve in those far-flung islands that are on our borders on East Africa, and those along Lamu in the oceans. You don't know what they have to go through to deliver those results securely within the national or the constituency tallying centers. They go through so much, and when those results come without coverage, we need to rethink on how we can make better the use of technology and not insist that we must have technology, we must have technology. It is difficult, and not even about technology. Basic infrastructure is lacking. There are areas where there are no roads. I remember I was observing elections in Nairobi, in Karen area, and there was one particular polling station at that point, those many years ago. They did not have electricity, and we had to use the gas lamps, and it was very ridiculous that in Karen, we do not have electricity. So what about the remote areas? These are the real challenges that the officers have to face, that, even the members of parliament who come from those specific areas, they know about these challenges, and yet we are the first ones to complain that IEBC is not delivering. So I think it is not to say that they will deliver a less credible election, but they'll have to work within those constraints to ensure they deliver to Kenyans a credible and a very free and fair process as envisaged in the Constitution.
Yeah, and Emriani was saying that ask them why we need to print our ballot papers abroad. Does this make a difference?
I don't think so. I think going back to what former commissioner said, again, it's a question of trust. As Kenyans, if we indicate we are printing ballot papers in industrial area, for example, vis-a-vis abroad, does that mean we'll have fair, credible, and a free process? What we need to look at here is, regardless of where the ballot papers are printed, do we trust the process? Are there clear mechanisms that any candidate who's vying for a particular office, from the member of county assembly to the presidential candidates, are guaranteed, including the electorate? So I think, again, as Kenyans, we need to move away from the semantics and go to the root cause of why, one, we don't trust the elections in this country, and two, what can be done to increase the process, because it is a process. Looking at lessons learned in the past, where we've had preparations perhaps not being done properly, what caused that and how can we improve on that? So again, I hear what she's saying, but I'd be keen to Kenyans to not focus on the semantics. Let's go deeper. Let's look at the root cause, why we never have fully prepared elections in this country, and then pose the questions at that point.
Yeah. And Zaja, IEBC has now published the possible financing caps, so to speak. They're saying the presidential poll should cost about 4.4 billion shillings at most. The gubernatorial positions between 123 to 117 million, depending on where you are. But is it even practical to monitor those figures, or are those just figures on paper?
It is not just figures on paper. Remember, campaign financing is one area that is quite a challenge. Remember, elections is a process that brings our society together. And it is one process where there is a lot of fraud and corruption money coming in. So this is the reason why the election campaign financing law is passed, and the regulations there too, which are still pending in Parliament, need to be passed and approved by Parliament, so that these limits that have been set by the IEBC can be implemented. It is not easy, of course, for the Commission, because remember, the Commission has so much to handle during elections. But once they set those limits, they expect that every candidate, every political party, presidential candidates, will all form their committees in good time. They will also open accounts, which they will have to be giving reports on their expenditures, so that in this way the Commission can build capacity In fact, they cannot actually work on their own because they lack that capacity. They may have to enlist the assistance of other key agencies of government so that this enormous task is accomplished. Because remember, the monies have to go into accounts. The banking industry is there, and they have to again be withdrawn for purposes of use during the campaigns. So it is important to remember setting the limits is very key, because in elections we know very well there is the key principle of leveling the playing field. The field is never level because there are those of politicians who spend too much money, and this is money whose sources is not known. Remember that the sources have also to be disclosed, because if the source is not known, then you'll also find that the KRA will come in to find out how did this person or how did this party acquire these finances. So again, I mentioned in an earlier interview that this is where the Commission also needs to come up with a collaborative approach with other agencies to ensure that these campaign limits that have been set are actually implemented in accordance with the law. They may not necessarily be able to monitor each and every aspect, but at least those aspects of the law that need to be monitored, there has to be a report being made by every candidate, by every political party, every presidential candidate on how the monies they are using is expended within those limits.
Yeah. And are those figures practical? They're ceiling, yes, they're the top of the range figures, like 4.4 billion shillings. But when you hear that, doesn't it already alienate some people?
Absolutely.
Definitely.
I think it depends on how you look at it. One, what we need to laud the IEBC in terms of the step they did today is fulfilling a constitutional mandate. We start from there. That the Constitution of Kenya is very clear at Article 88 that the IEBC needs to regulate the money spent by candidates. And again, going back to what Commissioner Zaja said, it's about leveraging. We have seen exponential spending by some candidates in this country, which does not really level the playing field. Secondly, is a question of the source. So what we need to invest in, if we are looking at a 4.4 billion budget for a presidential candidate, what structures are there to ensure the compliance? One is, of course, the political parties' declarations that are required. The expenditure committees that have been mentioned are very important. And of course, looking at the crux of how they have crafted the law is that, for instance, no particular individual, be it a presidential candidate, should fund more than 20% of that entire budget. So when you look at 4.4 billion, at 20% of that is still not little money. So what we are calling for is, yes, we've seen it even in other jurisdictions. The Americans do it. What we want is declaration. If you're going to have 4.4 billion, can it be clear who's funding that, so that for purposes of accountability, transparency, and even in terms of leveraging, it's very clear. Of course, that really now begs a bigger question, Trevor. If you're having a presidential candidate spend up to 4.4 billion, what's the bigger context of that? If you look at the presidential salary in this country, I think what is gazetted and known is like probably around 2 million Kenya shillings. So those are some of the questions as Kenyans we need to ask. If you're having a member of parliament spending between 11 million and 30 million, yet we know their salaries, what does that speak to the level of financing or how they're going to recover that cost? So again, our urge to Kenyans as citizens is, even as we interrogate these figures, let's not just be stuck at what has been given, but let's go further and question what does that mean for an economy such as ours that is struggling in different aspects. And that way we can ask for more clarity. If it's regulations, as has been mentioned, these regulations have been at Parliament since 2016. Why are they taking very long? And for them to be implemented, we know that in this country, Trevor, as a lawyer, the challenge is not the law. We have plethora of law. It's the implementation. Yeah. So are we just going to pass regulations and laws which at the end of the day cannot be implemented? Because rarely do you have laws that are self-implementing. You need agencies, you need players to be able to be empowered to ensure that these laws can be implemented and speak to each other. Yeah. So I think for me, I'd be keen, and as ILOG, yes, a figure has been given. Let's have declaration, let's have transparency. transparency, and let's have citizens actively engaging and questioning candidates. What's their source of their funding? And you could have people who are funding you, if it's legitimate funding, declare it, and then people will be able to know.
And Madam Zaja, that brings me to my next question on integrity. What do you think is stopping the IEBC from sifting through everyone? Is it that the system is rigged to fail, such that even if they stop someone, someone can still go to court and still get clearance? What is stopping it from sifting and giving us the best of the best?
That's a very interesting question, Trevor. And I would say it started way back in 2013 when Parliament decided that the IEBC cannot vet candidates. Yet, in the law, in the Constitution, is very clear that IEBC must ensure they regulate the process by which candidates are nominated to vie. It was decided that an EACC form, a declaration form, is enough for a person vying for any position to fill, which of course you can understand nobody can self-incriminate. So that form is what has been used, and yet it is not sufficient. So the least that IEBC can do is to follow exactly what is in the law. Once political parties present their candidates, for as long as they meet the constitutional threshold, then IEBC has no option but to give them the nominations. So in fact, it is a process which we may have to rethink in future to really unpackage that particular constitutional provision on how IEBC can effectively regulate the process by which parties nominate their candidates. It is much deeper than what is just there as a principle in the Constitution. It needs to go deeper, and no wonder we ask that question. How can IEBC make that regulation more effective? Because they will totally rely on whatever information that is brought to them. And even if you went to court, you have to exhaust all the mechanisms. Person is not liable or is liable under the law. And by the time you go through all that, somebody has already been nominated to vie by a political party. So it is a thorny issue. It is an issue that we will have to discuss as a country and find out really if we are to do proper vetting of candidates, then what are the criteria we need to set? What criteria should guide us in getting the right people? And remember, even some of our communities have even done some grassroots kind of vetting. And you find in some areas somebody comes unopposed because they have gone through a grassroots nomination. And when they come to these party nominations and IEBC nominations, it's just a formality. So we need to rethink this question and see if we can make it progressive to bring leaders who are people of integrity, people who meet the requirements of Chapter 6. Remember, Chapter 6 is supposed to be giving us the code, the guidelines, but it does not seem that the leaders we get actually meet Chapter 6 requirements. So we need to do a lot of work in future in terms of this requirement.
And what is the best way of achieving Chapter 6? Just ensuring integrity is upheld.
As a Kenyan, as a citizen who's actively participating in her country's matters, I think there are two layers. There is, of course, what the law helps us with. The law has been very clear. There's jurisprudence in terms of what integrity is. But the challenge is, as has been said, as Kenyans, we know these candidates, we live with them, we offload the responsibility and the burden that we should have to institutions such as the judiciary, which in our view is not fair, because at the end of the day, or IEBC, we bring them at the tail end of the process. Integrity is very clear. We know right for right, wrong for wrong. the candidates who present themselves for elections are not strangers in our communities. They have certain track records. So the questions beckons then, as Kenyans, why do we wait until the IEBC or EACC or the judiciary has to pronounce themselves on certain candidates? And remember, integrity is across the board. Integrity includes matters not just in terms of economic integrity, but even human rights. What's a track record in terms of a person who, how do they engage with the less privileged in the society, marginalized groups? So as Kenyans, I think the burden, as you've asked, is not an easy one, but I think we have been trying to get ourselves off the hook of being actively involved in vetting. And I always give the example. I know people imagine that at the end of the day, finances are all that are required to select or elect a candidate. But we've seen Kenyans in this country defying odds and really going against the raft and even choosing candidates who had barely nothing because they believed in the manifesto, in the integrity of these candidates. So I think we need to get more serious as a country and own the fault that we have collectively failed in terms of stopping people who we know within our communities who should not be vying because of integrity issues, and then having this issue backstopping with the judiciary, with the IEBC, and with political parties. So we need to get more involved. And once we do that, I think even any candidate will know that the onus is on them to prove themselves as having people, as being people of integrity, and that the vetting is at different levels within the community.
All right, let's take a quick break here on the Monday Report. I see a lot of your feedback and some videos that is coming through. We'll post those to my panelists and then we'll wrap it up in just a bit, all right? See you shortly. All right, thank you for staying with the Monday Report. Let's see what you're saying on the videos you've sent through. Let's bring them up.
My pledge to the IEBC is to ensure that during the campaign period, normalcy is maintained by the people who are doing the campaign. Let them watch keenly. Anyone who breaks the campaign rules should be disqualified.
Tell us the factors and the criteria you used to come up with. For example, an area with a population of 100,000 people should use up to a maximum of Kenya shilling 20 million. Does it mean every individual in that area will get 200 shillings or 200 shillings per square kilometer? And did you consider the level of economy at the moment?
Every election in Kenya has issues, and the only institution that can ensure that these issues of post-election issues are solved is actually the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission. So we expect this time round and the other years to come for this particular commission to show transparency, to run the election with high integrity.
How sure are we that this year all the loopholes that were witnessed in last general elections, the elections for MCA and MPs and governors, will not be witnessed this time round? Two, we have seen a lot of politics going on in the delimitation and marking of the new constituencies, the boundaries of new constituencies. There are a lot of constituencies which are so big, like Ijin Rewa is so big. How are we being assured that in the next delimitation we will have fairness in this creation of new constituencies? Because I believe it will be done in 2024. How is Mr. Chairman assuring us that it will be done as per the required factors?
Madam Zaja, you hear the concerns of the people there and what they're posing. And also Samuel Orutwa here on Twitter says that all factors in elections are constant. Election credibility is determined by human factors supervising and ensuring everything is done credibly by the IEBC commissioners. How then can they ramp up this sort of building of confidence in the institution?
All these questions are valid and concerns are valid, and it requires everybody to play their role. Remember, we have given commissioners constitutional responsibilities. But what is our role as citizens? What is our civic duty when it comes to elections? Because if we play our part as envisaged in the Constitution, we will make it lighter for the Commission so that they can achieve the principles that are set out in the Constitution. But if we keep putting blame on them, then what are you doing as a citizen to ensure that those processes go right? And even as we talk about these issues, remember, it takes two to tangle. If the IEBC is giving us information on what to do during the elections, what are you doing to make sure you are abiding as a law-abiding citizen and make their work easy, so that at the end of the day, when we have a free and fair election, we shall all rejoice as a country that we have made it together. So I think there is a lot that we need to do as citizens. There is a lot that we need to remember. And I've also had the concern about the areas in the setting of the limits. I think we should remember that the Commission has used legal parameters in coming up with these set amounts, because remember, they have to look at those parameters that have been set in law. They look at the density of the population. They look at how well an area is developed in terms of communication, geographically, the expanse of the place, and how people, communities relate. There are many issues that are in the law that have given them direction on what to do. So I think we need to give the Commission time. They need to be given the space to undertake their responsibilities in a manner that exudes confidence from the public, in a manner that shows that if they are going wrong, it is not because they are going wrong. Of course, there are small human errors here and there, and we have seen in many jurisdictions, even the US, which is a jurisdiction we respect. It has a democratic culture which is over 200 years old. We saw how they had problems last year with their election. Their democracy was put to test, but because they stood on their constitution, they believe in their constitution, they believe in their institutions, that is how they were able to sail through. So can we build that kind of a culture around the things we do, and ensure that we are supportive of the Commission, we are supportive of the electoral process, that at every phase we are supportive to the Commission so that they can deliver a credible election to Kenyans.
All right, Anne, there's a comment here from Churchill of Mondi. It says, trust comes as a reciprocal from the institution. Citizenry will only trust when the institutions are also honest and not crude. But sometimes this honesty is a matter of perception. Because if the politicians stand up and say they lied, kimeibiwa, kirudiwo, nobody questions anything.
Absolutely, Trevor. And I think if we look at elections, not to simplify it with this example, but to liken it to a World Cup football final match, I think what is most important is, even as you come as both teams, there's only so much a referee can do. The referee will expect that as teams, you're abiding to a code of conduct, your coaches have prepared you, and your fans also contribute to ensuring that the discipline of the match is actually upheld. I think in this context, and as a former commissioner has mentioned, we need to cut the IEBC some slack, rightfully, because at the end of the day, there's a lot more that needs to happen. I like that Kenyans are asking questions. It shows they are invested in the process. What we now need to work towards is the processes and systems that guarantee a free, fair and credible election, regardless of human interference. Secondly, voter education is very important. And again, I go back to where, as ILOG, we have made, I think, 5 fundamental suggestions in terms of what we are referring to as critical issues that must be addressed. One is the voter registration. Very important. We cannot cut out or leave behind a particular segment of the society, including the voter education that comes with that. If you look at an 18-year-old who's going to vote for the first time, they need to have been educated on what that means. It's just not a matter of issuing them with a voter's card and having them turning up at a polling center. Secondly, we must look at the dispute resolution mechanisms in terms of elections. A lot of education still needs to happen. At the end of the day, as a candidate or as an aspirant, I need to be prepared that I might win, I might lose. If I'm not happy with the turnout of events or with the outcome, I need to have clear mechanisms that I can pursue to ensure that at the end of the day, even if I'm not winning, it's very clear why I lost. That's very important. We must also look at the political primaries. primaries, political parties primaries. These are very important. Even as we speak about election financing, let's remember the largest vehicle that guarantees aspirants being elected into office in this country are the political parties. Who's engaging them? Who's looking at the level of violence? I think there's one caller who said we need to look at violence during the nominations and election day. Who's speaking to the political parties? And you know, in this country, Trevor, political parties belong to owners. Are we engaging those owners properly for them to subscribe to codes of conduct, to have their members subscribe to a non-violent culture regardless of how the turn of events go? So these are very critical things that we need to look at. The role of security. We have seen in the previous by-elections there have been certain questions around election security. Are we engaging the national security institutions properly? And these are questions not IEBC to engage, even citizens themselves. And I like that we are now starting to see the urgency. And on top of all that, Trevor, again, we remind Kenyans, the uniqueness of the 2022 elections will be COVID. COVID is something that no one was prepared for. This is a pandemic. So even as we engage in all these issues, if in a normal situation trust was a complex issue to achieve, how much more will it be complex with COVID? For citizens to understand social distancing, that this time around you might have to you need to enter a polling center, you must be masked. Do they understand at the end of the day their safety comes first? Yeah. So we need to engage in continuous voter education, and trust is something that is earned over time. Okay. What we need to invest in are the processes and the systems that will lead to a situation where Kenyans trust what is there. If you're a winner, you have won squarely, and if you've lost fairly. Yeah. I think that's very important.
All right. Yeah. Madam Zaja, as I take closing remarks from you, what should we focus on right now going forward for the IEBC and for the people as well? It's 365 days with the polls.
Allow me, Trevor, before I go to what we need to focus on, allow me to talk about how we organize our politics. We organize our politics in such a way that now already the media has packaged that we are going to have a two-horse race. And you know how our political parties are organized on tribal lines. We had to entrench in our constitution a principle that political parties will not be formed on the basis of, tribal lines, regional lines, but will have a national character. So when we form political parties along tribal lines, we leave out some communities, many communities, which are called minorities, marginalized, and of course another word that has come to be used is and others. So where do all these others fall? And I'm speaking to a big constituency here because we find that they are left out right from the way parties are organized. When government is formed, all these marginalized and minorities are left out. How are we ever going to ensure we are an all-inclusive society, an all-inclusive government? Decision-making trickles down from those big fives to those small fives or those small twos. It's important that we need to rethink our way we organize politics if we are going to strictly adhere to the principles set out in Article 91. Now, looking at what we need to focus on moving forward is to ensure, first of all, that IEBC is adequately and getting timely funding for them to carry out their activities. The most crucial activity is voter registration. They have already given out the numbers that we have about 6 million youth out there who have national IDs and who need to be registered as voters. This is an urgent issue because remember, it has been highlighted that if these young people are disenfranchised, then it will be quite grave. And even if we were to reduce, or IEBC was to reduce the number of days for mass voter registration, I'm sure they can find a way of working with the National Registration Bureau to ensure that there is a mass and fast-tracked kind of registration of these voters so that come August 2020, they are not disenfranchised. The other thing is to ensure technology equipment is working, not just procured, but is going to work. And all the challenges that were seen in 2017 are incrementally reduced so that we can have a credible process. Yes, I know there are so many constraints when it comes to technology, but I think there is need to work harder to ensure that IEBC is on top of things when it comes to technology. The other issue is about voter education. We still have a lot of people who do not know what is expected of them during the elections and the election process. So we will need to have IEBC supported. There are many stakeholders in this regard, including faith-based organizations which can come out to support IEBC and ensure that the masses out there, especially in the rural areas, are supported. And in this regard, I just want to point out that the media should be on the front line of offering that support to the Commission. The media plays a very critical role, and they can make decisions not to put their business interests ahead of national interests, but ensure that they are putting aside all what they need to put aside during the electoral process, so that for once we can be patriotic and hold hands with IEBC and ensure the masses are given timely information and proper information on the electoral process. So I think those are the areas we need to focus on, and the other areas which Madam Anne has already talked about in terms of how the politicians and political parties need to follow the strict codes that are laid out in the law.
Okay. Madam Anne, closing remarks?
Thank you, Trevor. I think in terms of the timelines you're looking at, to be practical, we need to make sure that the priority right now is election management body, that is IEBC. And let's start with the basics. Right now, we are 12 months to an election. The Commission only has 3 commissioners out of 7. So we need to first start by fast-tracking the confirmation of the nominated or otherwise of the individuals who have been afforded by His Excellency the President. Secondly, we need to do serious housekeeping at IEBC, starting with ensuring that the top officials, for instance, the CEO has been acting since 2017. That is really not right. So can we have a substantive CEO? And from there, I think once we have a fully functional IEBC, then focus can go to the hardware matters of elections. For instance, educating Kenyans and having us understand on clear pathways of election results, because that's still yet to be understood. Looking at an audit of the 2017 KIMS equipment, has that been done? And over and above that, then investing in the voter education, which includes reaching out to special interest groups. We have the youth, we have the minority, we have women. So we need to really, at this point, prioritize the IEBC and give them what they require in terms of infrastructure, in terms of policy, in terms of administrative reforms, and of course give them room for them to be able to conduct what needs to happen between now and the election. Bearing in mind, for instance, the official campaign period is May 30th, 2022. So I think even those who have perhaps started the process need to just take a step back, give the IEBC a chance to even gazette and let us know what are the rules of engagement to start with. And most importantly, to call upon the fourth estate, as has been mentioned by former commissioner, to educate Kenyans, to engage Kenyans, and aside from the mainstream education, I think even places such as our places of worship, the churches, the mosques, these ideal places that we can really capitalize on, and really to call upon Kenyans that elections, again, as we see, is not the 9th of August 2022. It's a whole process. Let's get involved as Kenyans right now, 12 months to the elections, and even post the election. The elections don't end then. There are vital lessons to be learned. Right now, we should be debriefing what we learned in 2017. And for purposes of posterity. So let's all get involved. The elections don't belong to the IEBC or politicians or political parties. Your vote today as a Kenyan will determine your life for the next 5 years or beyond. So let's all get out, let's get involved at our places of influence, and ultimately let's play our civic duty as outlined in the Constitution.
All right, thank you so much. Well said. Annie Reri, ELOG Chair and FIDA Executive Directors, and Lilian Mahiri Zaja, former Vice Chair for IEBC. Thank you for making time, and thank you for all the feedback that we've seen. We have to leave it there for now. My name is Trevor Ombija. On behalf of the entire team that made this possible, we say thank you, good night, have a great week. Bye for now.